Chapter 6, Part 2. Well, Brian began, as Jamie sat down on the grass, what we all do agree on is that Catherine Brooks is dangerous. She always has been. It's true, said Jamie. She told me herself how she was a school bully. All I remember was, said Sarah, when she was here, she was the scariest girl at the college. I wouldn't go anywhere near her. Right nasty she was. Always in trouble with the police. Poppy then interrupted. She has a problem with violence, you see. She almost killed her boyfriend because of her rage. You wouldn't have wanted to mess with Catherine, mate, said Brian, patting Kip on the back. Kip looked around. He was beginning to feel nervous. Hop had often written about how the forest had always been a dangerous place, a place full of ghosts and secrets, a place of hunters and their prey. Fox against rabbit, hawk against mouse. The forest was a playground in which Catherine Brooks could act out her cruel cravings on an unsuspecting and trusting victim. I've heard stories of the attack, said Spike. So it's all true then? It's all true, said Sarah. Mike was in hospital for weeks. Didn't she get arrested? Asked Sebastian. No, Mike wouldn't press charges, said Poppy. That's often the case, isn't it, with domestic violence? You said she was the scariest girl, said Kip. So she's definitely not at the college anymore. Well, nobody's seen her for ages, said Brian. She used to work for accommodation services until they sacked her for slapping one of the students, then failing to show up for her shift. She worked over in the mansion house, Kip, Jamie continued. We're all praying that she's gone forever. Poppy pulled Jamie up off the grass and brushed the dirt from his legs. The tree that Jamie had been sitting under was full of red berries, and some of the juice had stained the back of his jeans. The tree was also blocking the path, so Poppy pulled back the branches so that the gang could pass by. Sebastian, being the last through, pulled at the branch, pulling off some of the berries. Don't pick the berries, they're poisonous, Poppy snapped. Anyway, they're food for the birds, said Stella. Don't spoil their dinner. Kind of tree is it? Asked Spike. A hawthorn, Poppy replied. Don't you know your trees? They're not poisonous, are they? Kip asked, picking the last bloom of a wild rose from a bush. I grabbed at some earlier. I didn't wash my hands. I think they are, said Stella. Now, you've got me confused. Anyway, I thought they had white flowers. They do, said Poppy, and after they have the berries. Shame it's not a cherry. I like cherries, said Sebastian, grinning. Kip picked off the rose petals one by one, scattering them on the ground like large droplets of blood, a scene of violence, a place of peril. Then Kip turned to Spike and said, Catherine Brooks knew my brother. They were in the same literature class. She hated him. I know this. I've studied my brother's diaries. It's all recorded in there. She wanted him dead. It wouldn't surprise me, Brian chuckled. It's not funny, Brian, Kip growled. Did he write a lot about Catherine, Kip? Poppy inquired. Yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense, though. And there are some pages that have been ripped out. I often wonder about that. Did my brother tear out these pages? I can't believe he would destroy his own diary. Not Hop. He was obsessed with recording every detail about his life. Always told me that he'd be famous one day, and his diaries would earn him a fortune. A man with a plan, eh? Said Brian. Then there's the book of magic nonsense he wrote when he moved to Brighton. He became friends with this woman called Ivy Godwin. That's the woman who attacked Mike with Catherine in the woods, said Jamie. A nasty piece of work she is too. There are many places around the lakes that have been tainted by violence, Cindy, said Sarah. You might like to paint the places that have witnessed some of these terrible times. You know, for your project on passion and revenge. You mean Sorry Tales of Violence? Yes, I'd like to. You must show me where to set up my easel. Sarah then said, I wonder what happened to Ivy Goodwin. Who knows? She could still be prowling the woods as we speak. Don't say that, Brian, snapped Sarah. She killed herself, Kip said. Didn't you read about her suicide in the papers? Yes, said Brian. I'd forgotten all about that. Drowned, wasn't she? Do you want to hear about this book of magic or not? Kip asked, beginning to lose his patience. Go on, Kip, said Jamie. I'm interested. Well, this book is very different to its diaries. If you read between the lines, all the talk about healing and protection and the love for all living creatures, there's something far more sinister, something dangerous. There's a darkness to the words, sometimes a revengeful and hateful tone to the language. I came to the early conclusion that this was in response to Max betraying him, a reflection of how he felt about Catherine Brooks. There are pages of protection spells. I think he was scared. My brother never actually said anything hateful about Max in the book, not with his carefully chosen words. It's really hard to figure out, but you can read between the lines. I've always felt that the reality of Hop's friendship with Max was far from the myth that has flourished here at the college, said Jamie. You mean? Kip began. I think your brother really hated this boy. I do believe that Max was the main reason why my brother is dead. Not that Max murdered Hop, but they got themselves tangled up in something. I thought we'd established that Catherine Brooks killed your brother, interrupted Stella. She'd been quiet for ages, dreaming of Kip as she walked, picturing him naked in her arms, surrendering to her desires. Kip went silent for a moment. He didn't answer Stella. He remembered one of the passages from the diary. I told Max that he was looking awe-inspiring in his new tracksuit. He grinned, saying how he expected me to match his magnificence. He unzipped his sports bag and handed me a matching suit. I told him I would never be as fit as him, and that he'd squandered his money. He grinned again, opening the bag wider. Look, he said. So I did. Max had a dead duck in his bag. Max said he'd snuck up on the poor goose and throttled it with his bare hands. He laughed and said how the bird never saw the end coming, and how that was often the way of things. He then told me to change into the new clothes. After our run, Max made me pluck the goose. We cooked it on a campfire and ate it together. Max then tricked me into telling a lie. As Eve was blamed for Adam's downfall, then surely Max can be blamed for mine. I'm not sure why or how, Kip continued. I don't know if Max was bullying my brother, or making him do things that made him pack in his course, but running away from Max and the college did lead him into the hands of his murderer, whoever that was. Ivy Goodwin, Sarah announced. My money's on her. I don't know. I think that Ivy could have murdered my brother. She was the woman that attacked Mike, said Brian, and any woman that can do something so vicious to a young man has to be capable of murder too. So what was going on? Asked Stella. We don't know, Sarah replied, but everyone at the college still talks about how Hop and Max were the best of friends until Catherine Brooks came along. But then you have to ask yourself, what did they do that was so terrible to make them fall out? It can't have been over Catherine. That's what people are saying, said Brian. And you believe that? Asked Spike. Probably not, no. So what is it that you want, Kip? Asked Sarah. I hope you haven't come to the college to do something silly. I want to find the truth behind this myth. I want to know what Max made my brother do when he was here, and why he ran off to the seaside resort of Brighton, of all places, and how he ended up dead. How Max got himself murdered. I also want to know why everyone seems to go on about Max's genius. I know my brother was the clever one. Did Max try to steal my brother's work? Hop was destined to become a famous artist. I read that in the newspapers during the investigation. I've heard that his poetry was something else. It was, Jamie, Kip said, smiling. It really was. Let's go, guys, Sarah said, starting to walk up the path. I don't want to go back yet, said Kip. Let's go further into the woods. If you're feeling energetic, we could run up those hills, Brian suggested. It'll take your mind off things. I don't want to take my mind off what happened, Brian. That's the reason I'm here. That's the whole point. Then come on, he said. We'll take you to where it all started. The place where we believe Max was really murdered. Yes, said Kip excitedly. This is what I want to see. According to the police reports, the last person to see Hop alive was Ivy Goodwin. Although there was nothing in the diaries to suggest that she had or could have murdered Hop, in fact everything he wrote about this strange woman spoke of his absolute devotion to her, Kip felt instinctively that she did murder him. Ivy Goodwin had killed his sweet brother in his Brighton bedsit and had gotten away with it. Hop had first met Ivy Goodwin at the college during the first term. She'd walked into the tutorial as students were preparing to leave, and then in a loud voice, loud enough to be heard over the noise of the chairs, announced details of the lecture she was giving. "I will be giving an insight, or an overview, into the subject of ritual and magic in literature," she began. "Paganism is a constant theme throughout the history of literature." Ivy paused. She cleared her throat and then roared, "Are you listening? It will provide useful background material for some of your future essays." The students were stunned into silence at the sight and sound of this oddly dressed hunk of a woman. "Please take one of my leaflets as you leave. It also has my contact details on it if you ever need to get in touch with me about the subject, or if you want to join one of my summer classes." A little more than a year later, Hop contacted Ivy Goodwin. He left the college and moved to Brighton. Within 8 months of seeking Ivy's guidance and counselling, he was dead. Murdered on the same December evening as his friend Maximilian. Kip was certain that Ivy had perpetrated the crime. He just didn't know how. Perhaps she was even responsible for Max's murder too. Yet the police reports in the newspapers had ruled that out, the distance between the two murder scenes being hundreds of miles apart. But now Ivy was dead too. Kip had read about her suicide in the newspaper. "Perhaps it was her guilt that had overwhelmed her," said Poppy. "Catherine had no guilt," said Jamie. "No, I was thinking of Ivy Goodwin, why she committed suicide. If only I could get my hands on one of her diaries," said Kip. "Then I would know what kind of monster she was." "But that isn't to be, Kip," said Sarah. "We all have to face the fact that Ivy has gone to her watery grave unpunished for her crimes." The gang trekked onwards, picking up pace with the excitement of what was moments ahead. Kip was the most excited. He had long since worked out by reading the diaries that although his brother was murdered in Brighton, to get to the truth, he must first find out about Max's own demise, here within the college grounds. End of Chapter 6, Part 2.